Okay, so here we are in iMovie, and you'll see that I've laid down 3 different sequences using the same footage that you guys had access to. Here's one, here's the second, and here's the third. I just want to start off by saying you guys did a great job, and you've made my job even easier actually, in that you've actually uploaded the full spectrum of different styles of video that you could possibly make with these clips. You've all been very creative, and you actually pushed the boundaries of what we were even expecting from you guys for week 0. So I just want to show you a couple of different techniques that I've used basically to keep on cutting time off the length of this sequence in different increments. But first of all, let's talk about the visual story. So let's go to this first version here. And I start off with Jai walking into the preserve. It's pretty self-explanatory, and then he's walking on the beach. And then we cut to Jai looking for snow plovers. I think this cut is a little bit more difficult than that first one, in that if we were to cut from just Jai walking and then immediately see Jai looking for snow plovers, it's a little bit jarring. So what I chose to do was keep this pan on the end of the walking clip, and then I think it's easy for us to assume that Jai stopped walking and started looking for snow plovers while we panned to the dunes and kind of got him out of frame. So it just made that transition, that cut, a lot easier, and it just flowed a lot more nicely. Now for the next cut, we had the luxury of having 2 angles with the same action. So what we were able to do is make a cut on the action, and it's a very traditional way of making a cut in footage. And what I chose to do was just edit the clip until the binoculars were a certain distance from his eyes, and then on the next clip I cut it so until the binoculars were about the same distance, and that just makes that cut a lot more natural as well. It also serves a secondary purpose in compressing the amount of time taken to deliver the information. If we were just to use one clip by itself, the amount of time it takes for Jai to look, raise the binoculars, look through them, lower them, then write in his notebook is considerable, especially for a very short sequence like this. When we've got several clips to cut to, including the B-roll, we can compress the amount of time that takes, especially when we cut to the B-roll here. So we're only 20 seconds in, and we can already see the main subject of our video. We've got this dramatic close-up of a snowy plover. And once we're done with that B-roll, we can cut back to Jai. And this was actually the same shot as on the other side of the B-roll. But if we were to play all the clip in between these 2 sections, it'd be a lot longer than the 3.5 seconds that we've given to the snowy plover. But by cutting to something else in between, we can cut a whole lot of unnecessary time out, and when we cut back to Jai, we can just leave a few fractions of a second before he lowers his binoculars. Then we tilt down to his notebook, and I actually chose not to include the part where he writes in the notebook, just because he's already got the pen in his hand. It's kind of implied that that's what he's going to do. And then I cut to Jai's piece to camera. But before we get onto that, let's just backtrack a little bit here, because I hope you'll also notice that I've detached the audio from all of these clips and just got rid of it. The audio that I've put in its place is associated with that long 2-minute shot of the ocean that I included, and you'll see that I actually called it AU0023, I believe. It doesn't actually show the file name on here, but I gave that little clue to myself that I shot this for the audio, and I saw a lot of you used it in your stories. It's a very evocative shot of the ocean lapping on the seashore there. It provokes a lot of positive emotions in people, but I wouldn't say it's the most efficient way to get across the message that we wanted for this video. I did shoot it mainly for the audio, and in the business we'd call this a wild track. It's atmospheric sound of the place where the action is taking place, or of the place that you're talking about in your video. So what I did was I brought some of this track down onto the timeline like this, and then I detached the audio and instead of deleting the audio, I actually just moved it somewhere else so it's attached to something else temporarily. Then I just deleted the visual part, and what I did was I used this audio track under there like that. So I'm just going to get rid of this because I've already done this section. And what this means is we've just got a lot more audible continuity between all these different clips. I could have mixed the audio from each clip to the next, but rather than spend the time doing that and still have that slight mixing effect in the soundtrack, I just altered the levels as we cut from one clip to the next. So I imagined that the bird song at the beginning of this audio track suited quite well to this clip on the bluffs here, because I imagine there are birds in the trees and the undergrowth here. But then on the next shot we're further away from the ocean and we're further away from Jai, so I brought the levels down a little bit to emulate reality. Sounds are less prominent when we're further away from them. And then when we get closer to Jai and closer to the ocean in the next shot, I bring the audio up again, but it's still all one track, so it has a continuous feel and really sets the tone for the place where we're supposed to be while we're seeing the action unfold. Okay, so then we were at Jai's piece to camera, and you can see I've started bringing the audio for that before we start to see the visuals, and I've mixed in the audio there like I showed you on that first tutorial. And then from here, a lot of you picked up on the purpose of these illustrative B-roll shots. Use them to emphasize what Jai's talking about. First he talks about snow plovers using pebbles to hide from the wind, then predators. There isn't enough gap in between those two examples for me to cut back to the A-roll and for it to still feel comfortable. So I just cut from one B-roll clip to the next, and I think that works pretty well. And then we go back to Jai, and at this point he references the sand behind him. So if I just go frame by frame, he points at the beach, and he's talking about the snow plovers actually nesting directly on the sand. And this is all to do with Jai's delivery of his piece to camera. He actually refers to things, so it makes sense for us to see him in frame. It's also nice for him to be in the location that's relevant to what he's talking about. So that's just something to consider when you're thinking about how you're going to do your pieces to camera or record your narration. But it does come with its own problems. We have to deal with various noise interferences. The noise of the waves behind us was very loud, and there's the Santa Barbara airport just behind the dunes here, and in between the dunes and the mountains. So we're interrupted by aeroplane engines and boat engines and all this kind of stuff. So that's something to consider when you want to record your piece outside. So he refers to the sand behind him, and then we cut to the eggs being incubated by the female snowy plover. Then once we've seen that, he talks about what the snow plovers eat, and we use a shot of a snow plover feeding to illustrate that. Now, a lot of you noticed that at this point Jai makes a mistake in his piece to camera. He repeats, he says snow plovers feed on something called a sandfly, and then he says sandflies. The sandflies is unnecessary, it doesn't really make sense, and it can be a bit distracting, so I just chose to cut it out. But what that means is you've got these two halves of the same clip with some time missing in between. Now what I chose to do was cover that cut with some B-roll, and I was lucky enough that he was talking about something that I had a relevant B-roll to illustrate for. But if we were to remove that B-roll, pretend like we didn't have it, and if we play across that cut,
what they like to eat is something called a sandfly, and
you can see it's created what's called a jump cut, because we've got the two halves of the same clip on either side of the cut, but some time missing from in between. There's a jump. Jai visually jumps within the frame, which is not how we go about our daily lives. This is not how we experience life. and so it can actually disengage your viewer from your story, and it can distract them from your main message of your video. So let's put that B-roll back, and it covers up that cut quite nicely. And then we cut back to Jai to end with, he has his call to action to keep the seaweed on the beach, the kelp on the beach, to help out the snow plovers. Now this is a really nice sequence to do this exercise with. It's a very safe sequence. We've got this very easy visual narrative to put together. It's like jigsaw pieces in a jigsaw puzzle, but it's quite luxurious. We're taking quite a bit of time to set up the whole sequence. It's got a long introduction with very little information. We've just got this bit of Jai talking at the beginning, saying in April and May he likes to visit Color Point to look at snowy plovers. And we can see that if we just play it through.
This is Coal Oil Point Reserve. I come here in April and May to look at snowy plovers. This beach is great habitat for snowy plovers. The reason is, if you look here, there's all these small dunes and a lot of small pebbles. And snowy plovers use these things to protect themselves when it gets really windy, and also to protect themselves from predators. So these plovers, they make their nests right here on the beach. Those nests are called scrapes, by the way. So one of the reasons that this beach is so great for plovers is what they like to eat is also here. What they like to eat is something called a sandfly. And those sandflies, what they like to eat is back here. All of this washed up kelp, which washed up from on shore. So to keep the plovers here, it's really important to keep the kelp here, to not remove that kelp.
So you can see it, while the visual narrative works, it really takes a long time to get going, considering that the whole sequence is just over a minute long to begin with. These first opening shots seem really quite gratuitous, and while they're good to have just in case, I don't think in a realistic situation that we'd use them in your science videos, especially if you're considering that your whole video is going to be between a minute and a half or 3 minutes long. We may not have the time to include them. So I then proceeded to make 2 more sequences using the same kind of cuts, but getting rid of as much of the material as I possibly could. In this second version, I got rid of the entering the preserve shot, and then for the bird watching, this cut remains the same with the binoculars, but here where we get the perspective through his binoculars and look and see the snowy plover, which is a lot sooner, I'll have you note, in the sequence than it was here. While we see that B-roll, I've already started to bring in Jai's piece to camera. So we no longer have Jai making notes in his book. From the B-roll, we just cut straight to Jai's piece to camera, and that sounds a bit like this.
This beach is great habitat for snowy plovers.
So he says snowy plovers, and we've just seen what one looks like. So we've really introduced the main topic of our video a lot more quickly, and then the rest of this video plays out similar to the first. You'll notice that I didn't get around to deleting all the audio tracks, but I think I would have put this wild track under there and just got rid of these 2 or these 3 audio tracks here and just had that wild track mixed through. And then finally we've got our third version where I got rid of the bird watching shots completely. I open with the shot of Jai walking on the beach, but again you'll notice that I've got this wild track underneath, and I bring in Jai's piece to camera, the audio for it, almost immediately here. So this looks like this.
This beach is great habitat for snowy plovers. The reason is, if you look here,
So we see a snow plover as he mentions it in the A-roll, but now the B-roll of the snow plover is no longer presented as his perspective through the binoculars. It's just illustrating what he's talking about. It's a different style, but I think it gets the information across in a lot more efficient way. And you have to remember that we're trying to really engage our audience quickly and effectively. So this whole sequence is under a minute long, but yet it contains the same amount of information as this first sequence here. So you can see there's a lot of things that we can cut out that we really don't need. You'll notice that one thing that we've lost is that first bit of audio here where it says,
This is Coal Oil Point Reserve. I come here in April and May to look at snowy plovers.
and there's a way that we can add that to the sequence, and that's using text. Now, I understand this isn't something I showed you in that first tutorial, so I'm cheating a little bit, but you will need this skill for the week 1 exercise. And part of the week 1 exercise is that we're going to ask you to record a short video introduction of yourselves, and what we want you to do is put your full name and your affiliations on screen like this. And then you're free to just introduce yourself with your first name and then launch straight into what your interests are and what you're studying and what you hope to make a video about. And that way we can get over all that kind of boring what university you're working with, institutions, people you're working with, etc. You can put that on screen. So one way we can do that in iMovie is using this titles function. And with this shortened sequence, we've lost the time to include that audible I visit Coal Oil Point in April and May, and we can put some of that information back by writing it on screen. I'll show you how to do that in iMovie. So first of all, we want to go up here across to titles, and then we want to choose something very basic, and I believe I've chose something in the lower section of the screen. We probably want something like that, and we bring that down onto the timeline, and it has its own individual clip, and we can put that wherever we like. I want to put it over this clip, and now we can just double click that and type in coal oil point preserve UC Santa Barbara, and then we can get rid of those cheesy effects and just have a simple text there illustrating where we are, what we're looking at.
This beach is great habitat for snowy plovers.
So now we're getting across information on the Audible channel. We're getting information across visually using the images that we've shot, but also visually using text that we can write directly on screen. So let's think about that when we do our week 1 exercises, and I will see you in a few days. Good luck.